Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is INX Prime Live. Remember, we are on your screens every single Monday to Friday from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Now, we're about to get into our generational wealth education segment. Now, according to the recent study shared with us, about 55% of South African households have financial goals, while only 17.4% of them are on their way to achieving these goals. Now, what is more interesting is that the typical goal is to build wealth through long-term investment. Now, do we even know what that actually means or how to achieve wealth? If you can't define specifically what wealth looks like, then you need to seriously consider actually taking the time to map out your financial future. Now, your financial goals must be specific, measurable, attainable, and time-bound while being tied to a financial plan. Another important stat to look at is that 58% of people who don't have a financial plan feel anxious about the concept and the idea of money. Now, today we're looking at financial literacy. This is an important topic that covers basic financial concepts and skills that are necessary for making informed financial decisions. Now, joining me today is Omega, who is the founder and CEO of Money Mondays. Thank you so much for joining us, Omega.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you in studio. So I just want to touch on the first question that we have. Now, the segment is called Generational Wealth segment. How would you define the concept of generational wealth?
That's generally not an easy one to define, but I think what we have to do is sort of just go back a little bit and ask ourselves the question of what is actually wealth before defining generational wealth. In technical terms, it's very simple. Wealth is basically the accumulation of everything that you own minus your debts. That's your wealth. The other term for it is net worth. So basically the things that you own after, let's say, your debts were all paid, what would they be worth? But that's looking at wealth more from a financial perspective and a very material perspective. But wealth can actually encompass a lot of other things. So for example, you can have a wealth of knowledge on something. You can know a lot of things. You can have insights, and that could be wealth. So when we look at wealth, we might have to go a bit holistic to say this is a person's wealth. It's the things that they know, the skills that they have, and obviously the money that they have and the assets that they have. So assets, things like houses, investments that they might actually own. And then when we extend it to generational wealth, we then obviously have this format where we say, okay, here's you. You're wealthy individuals. But is your wealth generational? As in, can it extend to your children and grandchildren? So a couple of generations ahead of you, will the wealth that you have actually get to them? And then that's when we start to define what generational wealth is. It's basically the wealth that a person has accumulated extending beyond them only. So going to their children and in fact grandchildren, because obviously you will be alive when your children are alive and they will experience your wealth. But generational, on the other hand, we have to skip about 80 years to really say here's a generation. So your grandchildren also have to be included. Will they benefit from the wealth that you have? And that's how we will know if there's generational wealth in your life.
Yeah, you mentioned something very interesting, and you mentioned the fact that, generational wealth is beyond just the idea of money. It also comes down to mindset. So we're going to touch a lot on mindset as well, and the importance of having the right mindset. But let's take it back to financial literacy. Now, financial literacy is something that does affect a lot of South Africans today. We're seeing a lot of people on social media, a lot of conversations are trending right now saying that we need to change the school syllabus. We can't have the same subjects forever. We need to start seeing coding in schools. We have to start seeing financial literacy. Firstly, A, do you agree with that? And secondly, how would you define financial literacy in South Africa?
Yeah, obviously, I definitely agree with it in terms of getting financial literacy into schools. One of the biggest challenges in South Africa is that most people aren't prepared to actually have money. They're also not prepared to get money, and that's what education is technically meant to be. Education is technically a form of wealth. The skills that you have can't be taken from you, and you can use those skills to accumulate wealth, meaning you can use your skills to get money and thus buy some type of assets that would be a form of your wealth. So obviously, to have financial literacy will teach people how to accumulate money and how to handle money, but also adding skills, say, like coding or more advanced forms of science that prepare people for the future. That's actually giving people wealth in the form of skills. And South Africans, if we really are honest, tend to lack skills that are transferable to wealth. Most of the skills that people have don't really help them accumulate money, meaning they can't then accumulate wealth. If you have skills that don't help you accumulate money, it means actual financial wealth is going to be very difficult for you to get. So add financial literacy into schools, add skills that give people the ability to get wealth for themselves, and you'll find that we have a much happier country.
You said something very controversial there. You did mention the fact that people are not ready to actually learn or have money in particular. So let's just emphasize that, because it is true in South Africa we do have a money problem, and it's a massive issue when we're looking at debt and so much more. But why do you think South Africans are so bad when it comes to managing money or having money?
The explanations for why South Africans are bad with money are quite diverse. I would say let's start with the question of what is being bad with money, right? That's a very simple answer. If you're someone who feels that you're financially struggling, and if you look at the maths of your finances, you're struggling to get money, that's one struggle with money. Or you're struggling to keep money, meaning you get paid your salary, but by the end of the month, there's no money left, then obviously you're somebody who's probably would be defined as bad with money. You're bad with managing money. Some people are bad with obviously getting money. And the reasons for that are quite diverse based on your background. So some people, for example, if I sort of just generalize a bit, from some certain cultures, there isn't really a habit of developing financially literate children. So that's something that's there. Mom and dad that don't speak about money. They're very quiet about it. They're very shy about it. Money is something that's spoken of on a hush-hush. So that's one aspect that will then get you to be someone who doesn't actually know what even money is. So when you get money, you just spend it, you consume, you don't know how to actually use it to build your life. That's one aspect of it. Some people will come from a culture where actually they are blessed with money. Mom and dad give money, mom and dad have built wealth, but maybe they don't transfer the wealth of knowledge to their kids. So they transfer the wealth of money to their children, but not the wealth of knowledge. And what happens? The child grows up, gets money, misuses it, spends it, and by the time the parents are gone, the child is in fact broke. So there's different factors. And so the important thing is to understand this. If you look at your bank account and you're not happy with it, and you say, okay, obviously I'm probably bad with money. What you then have to do is diagnose yourself and say, why am I bad with money? What has happened to me growing up? And what have I been doing right now that's actually causing me to mishandle money? And that's where you'll actually get your answer as to why South Africans are bad with money. So it's an array of factors that cause South Africans to be bad with money.
Perfect. I just want to touch on investments in particular. Now, we know that you speak a lot about investments on all these different platforms. So just maybe some of the secret tips or some of the best places to look at investments. And I know that you did mention something that became very popular on social media as well, where you spoke about, while everyone's sitting and talking about load shedding and about electricity issues, there's some shares or stocks that you can actually buy into that's actually going to benefit you during this load shedding period. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'd have to give a whole class, but to sort of give a summary. So investing, you can do it in two ways, where you hand over money to a company. Generally, this is a really good idea for someone who wants to save for retirement. It's always a good idea to hand over to a reputable financial service provider and retirement fund manager. So if you're someone who wants to save for retirement, that's the best way to go. But at the same time, you can also do what we call DIY investing. So doing it for yourself, where you open a brokerage account with a reputable company as well, and you deposit some money and you start buying shares and various other types of assets for yourself. One of the things that you have to do when you are an investor is you have to look at the world, or specifically, you have to look at South Africa and ask yourself the question, how do I think the country is going to be in the future, within the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? So touching on the load shedding issue, there's a simple question that you can ask yourself, which is, where is South Africa's electricity in the future going to come from? And from answering that question, you can then find companies that will be solving that problem. So for example, one might argue that South Africa's future in terms of energy might be in renewable power. So solar energy, hydro power, wind maybe. And so you might then say, well, which companies are developing these technologies in South Africa? And that's when you will discover shares of companies that are doing that. So if I mention a few, for example, Exxaro, Sappi, Sasol, they all are trying to develop different technologies to sort of add power onto South Africa's grid. And so those are shares you might maybe look at. I'm not saying people should buy these. This is not financial advice. But what I'm just pointing out is the ability to research what's going on in your country. So one of the challenges that we have as people is we don't look at the negatives and see opportunities in them. And that's one of the best ways to create wealth for yourself, solving problems. So if you look at all the negatives that exist in South Africa, they actually all align with a particular solution that a person can develop and then sell. And there are companies in South Africa that are trying their best, especially in regards to load shedding. And that's where there's some investment opportunities if you sort of do your research.
Yeah, you sound like someone who has a lot of solutions. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that some of the secret sauce on how to become wealthy.
Yeah.
If you could give us 3 quick fire tips on how someone can become wealthy as quickly as possible, what are those?
It's very easy. The first step to being someone who becomes wealthy is you have to get income without raising capital. So whether you get it from a job or you start a business and you sell something, thus accumulating money, if you don't do that step, the other 2 steps are not going to be possible. So once you get money, whether it's a salary or a business, once you get money, you then have to do the other thing, which is you have to protect your credit score. A lot of South Africans have bad credit scores, and because they've got bad credit scores, they then can't actually build wealth using other people's money. By other people's money, I mean taking credit from a bank and buying a property and renting it out. So those are the 2 things that you have to do. Then the third thing you have to do is you have to buy assets that will give you the ability to actually have collateral whenever you want to, say, extend your wealth. So for example, you'd get an income. From that income, you know that you've protected your identity in terms of, say, you're a person who wants to get credit from a bank. You then get credit that enables you to actually expand a business or buy a property or any other asset that you can then use to actually accumulate more capital. So if you do those 3 things as a person, you'll be perfectly fine. Where people really mess up is they don't actually ever protect their financial record. And from that moment, you become uninvestable as a person.
Perfect, Omega. Thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Awesome, guys. That is Omega from Money Mondays, just telling us a lot more about financial literacy, as well as everything in particular when it comes to building up wealth, as well as generational wealth. Now, on that note, we are going to take a quick ad break. We'll come right back.